They called me the empty-handed bride, a woman who brought nothing but a name too plain for their marble halls. At first I smiled through the whispers, through the clinking glasses raised to toast my invisibility. But secrets don't stay buried in mansions built on debt. The crack in the foyer mirror widened the night I found a USB drive slipped from my sister-in-law's purse. Footage of staged charity galas, money flowing into shadow accounts. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I pressed play again and again, each click sharpening my silence into a weapon no one would see coming. The Whitaker estate stood like a monument against the Atlantic, a sprawl of gray stone and glass where the tide seemed to bow in obedience. When I first arrived as Caleb's bride, the air itself felt rehearsed, every corner polished, every table set as if life here was a performance designed for strangers' applause. Newspapers praised their philanthropy, their charity galas where gowns shimmered and cameras clicked. I had stepped into what looked like a fairy tale, but even fairy tales carry shadows. A week after our wedding, Lorraine, my mother-in-law, unveiled the grand portrait. It dominated the great hall, Caleb radiant in his tailored suit, his eyes bright with entitlement. I was there too, beside him, my features softened until they barely belonged to me. The artist had rendered my eyes as if I were a ghost, blurred, an accessory rather than a woman. Guests clapped and murmured their approval, and then Lorraine leaned toward a friend, her voice dripping with contempt. "The empty-handed bride," she said, just loud enough for the polished marble floor to echo it. The phrase clung to me harder than the perfume in that hall. I smiled, I nodded, I let the performance continue. Their world was built on symbols, paintings, trophies, the way waiters bent their backs just so. I learned quickly that silence was safer than confrontation, at least for now. But I also knew that houses this perfect were often painted over cracks. The first one appeared in the privacy of our bedroom. While Caleb spoke on the phone downstairs, I noticed something peculiar on the bookshelf, a black dot against the mahogany frame. I reached closer and my stomach turned. A tiny lens glinted back at me. Someone had planted a hidden camera in our room. I didn't touch it. I simply sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it, calculating what it meant. Who placed it there? Who was watching me? The second crack surfaced during a dinner party. As guests shuffled out, my sister-in-law dropped her clutch, spilling lipstick, a phone, and a slim black USB drive. She scooped it up too quickly, but not before I noticed the label, Foundation Q4. Later that night, curiosity won. While everyone slept, I borrowed Caleb's laptop, slid the drive in, and watched. At first, it was footage from a charity gala. Elegant gowns, champagne towers, smiling faces. But then the camera shifted behind the scenes, cash counted in back rooms, bank slips tucked into folders, and transfers logged into offshore accounts. The Whitakers weren't philanthropists. They were laundering money through their so-called foundation. The headlines that praised them as benefactors were nothing more than a mask. I played the files again, heart pounding. This wasn't mere vanity or snobbery. It was corruption dressed as virtue. And now, somehow, the evidence sat in my hands. The next morning, I walked through the estate with a different gaze. The chandeliers looked dimmer, the servants' smiles tighter, the laughter at breakfast more forced. Riches here were not wealth, but camouflage. Behind the silk curtains lay a rot that no one dared to name. One evening, while Lorraine entertained guests in the salon, I slipped into Caleb's study. The mahogany desk held a leather-bound ledger and a small safe, the kind with a simple key lock. Caleb had always been careless with keys, and I'd seen him drop one into the top drawer days before. I opened it, my hands trembling, half afraid of what I would find. Inside were documents, property deeds, loan agreements, insurance files. But one folder made me stop breathing. It was the updated family will. My eyes scanned line after line until I reached the beneficiaries. Caleb, his sister, even Lorraine herself, all listed with shares. Then came the final blow. My name was gone. They hadn't just whispered me into irrelevance. They had erased me, officially, from the legacy of this family. I closed the folder carefully, returned the key, and slipped out as laughter roared down the hall. My face was calm, my voice even. But inside me, something shifted. They saw me as powerless, as decoration, as an intruder they could discard. What they didn't know was that erasure has consequences. When you strip someone of a name, of a place, of recognition, you leave them with only one choice: to carve out their own power silently until the day the mask breaks. And in the Whitaker estate, the mask was already cracking. Silence became my camouflage. Lorraine could sneer at me across the breakfast table. Caleb could sigh at my lack of pedigree, and his sister could laugh at my plain handbags. Yet I lowered my gaze, let their insults brush past me like a breeze. To them, I was shrinking. To me, I was sharpening. People reveal themselves most easily when they believe you powerless. I kept walking through the estate as though defeated, but my hands were busy. At night, while the halls quieted, I slipped into Caleb's study again, tracing the wiring from the hidden camera I had discovered in our bedroom. Whoever installed it thought it belonged only to them. I added a small splitter and a wireless drive, discreet enough to feed me copies of every recording. Their surveillance had become my weapon. Every whisper they captured, I now captured too. Days later, I sat alone with the first batch of files. Conversations layered over one another. Lorraine instructing the housekeeper to destroy receipts. Caleb telling a banker that funds will flow through the foundation. His sister rehearsing speeches about generosity while planning transfers offshore. The hypocrisy stung less than the detail. Each number, each slip of paper, became a thread in a web that trapped them more than me. Then came the discovery that jolted me like a cold wave. Buried in an email chain was a legal draft for the Foundation's quarterly report. In tidy legal language, I was listed as responsible officer of record. Not Caleb, not Lorraine. Me. They were building the perfect scapegoat, attaching my name to their fraud so when the storm hit, I would be the one drowned by evidence. I read the line again and again, my pulse pounding in my ears. Lorraine had called me empty-handed, but here they were, filling my hands with blame. They wanted me erased from inheritance, but immortalized in liability. That was their game. I didn't cry. I cataloged. I copied the emails, secured the backups, stored them under encrypted codes only I understood. Then I went to the mirror in our bedroom, staring at my reflection under the cold camera's watchful eye. "If you want me powerless," I whispered, "you should never have written my name." Memories carried me back to a storm long before the Whitakers. I was 24 when a hurricane flattened my mother's motel. Tourists fled, insurance stalled, and bankruptcy loomed. Everyone said we were finished. But I studied contracts the way some study scripture. I saw the motel's debt was bundled with others, sold for pennies on the dollar. So I scraped together investors, bought the debt myself, and then flipped it to a travel corporation hungry for beachfront. Within a year, I had saved my mother, paid off creditors, and built a cushion no one knew existed. That cushion had grown into something bigger, a discreet auditing firm registered quietly under my trust, a place where numbers told stories, where shadows had nowhere to hide. The Whitakers thought I brought nothing to the marriage. They had no idea I carried an arsenal of experience, a company forged in survival. When the weight of secrets threatened to crush me, I sought counsel from someone outside their gilded cage. Evan Clark, a financial journalist I once helped avoid a libel suit, owed me more than gratitude. He answered my call immediately, voice sharp with curiosity. I told him only pieces, careful not to expose myself too soon, but enough for him to understand the stakes. "If what you're saying is true," he murmured, "this isn't just scandal, it's systemic fraud." His promise was simple. When I was ready, he'd be my megaphone. Back in the manor, I tested the weapon I now held. From the copied files, I stitched together a video, Lorraine rehearsing lines about orphan scholarships, then the same footage cut to her in the back office, instructing an aide to route funds offshore. It was raw, undeniable. Watching her face shift between performance and command, I felt no triumph, only clarity. This was who they were, and this was what they had made me. The woman who knew their truth. I saved the file, named it with a single word, inheritance, because it wasn't jewels or deeds they would give me. It was this, proof, ammunition. As I closed the laptop, the camera's red dot blinked at me from the bookshelf. I smiled at it, for the first time not as prey but as predator. To stay alive in the Whitaker house, I had to learn their game and then pretend to play it. When Lorraine or her daughter slid papers across the table, I didn't refuse. I signed with a smile, let the pen glide over dotted lines, appearing compliant. Each flourish of my signature was a performance, because I knew exactly what I was doing. Copying, scanning, storing. Their trap became my archive. My silence gave them confidence, and confidence made them careless. Caleb, for his part, had grown distant. He worked later, spoke less, avoided my eyes at meals. I told myself it was pressure from his mother, but one evening I followed the trail of his documents and found something colder. A contract, stamped and notarized, his signature heavy at the bottom. It was an agreement with the family's attorneys to exclude me from every holding, every trust, every piece of property tied to the Whitaker estate. My name, already erased from inheritance, was now formally locked out by the man who had vowed to love me. Betrayal doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives in ink, in silence, in the casual cruelty of a pen stroke. The night of the gala, Lorraine paraded guests through the great hall. Laughter rose like smoke, and wine glittered under chandeliers. Then, without warning, the sound of glass shattering cut through the noise. The massive wedding portrait's frame had given way, the mirror lining behind it splintering across the marble floor. Gasps filled the air as shards scattered, reflecting broken versions of every face present. Caleb ordered staff to clean it quickly, but I couldn't stop staring. The symbol was too sharp to ignore. The image they had crafted, the illusion of unity, fractured for all to see. It was after that night that chaos spread. A video appeared online, grainy but damning. Lorraine was shown backstage at a charity gala, her words clear. Move the money before the auditors arrive. The clip ended abruptly, but it was enough. Social media erupted. Hashtags accused the Whitakers of fraud. Tabloids circled the estate like vultures. Inside the manor, hysteria brewed. Lorraine stormed from room to room, demanding to know who had betrayed her. Caleb cursed into his phone, trying to contain the story. His sister wept at the dining table, insisting someone had hacked them. But no one looked at me. To them, I was still the empty-handed bride, too weak to wield such power. Within days, the Foundation's board convened an emergency session. Journalists camped outside the gates. Every time I stepped out, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted my name. The family locked themselves inside, pointing fingers in every direction. Lorraine accused the accountant. Caleb whispered suspicions about the house staff. Yet beneath their fury, fear gnawed at them. They had built an empire on illusion. An illusion doesn't survive daylight. I knew the video had not come from me. At least, not yet. Someone else had opened the first crack wide enough for the world to see. That unsettled me. Allies are dangerous when unseen. So I staged my next move carefully. One morning, I packed a small bag, walked through the hall with deliberate slowness, and announced I was leaving. Lorraine didn't hide her satisfaction. Caleb looked relieved, even grateful. They believed they had pushed me out, that I was retreating in defeat. In truth, my absence gave me space to act. The mansion was their prison now, walls closing tighter as the world demanded answers. From a rented apartment in the city, I prepared. I sorted files, strengthened backups, reached out to my quiet network. Evan, the journalist, warned me investigations were accelerating. "They'll try to pin this on you," he said. "They already have your name on the paperwork." I told him that was exactly why I couldn't let them write the ending. Late one night, as I sifted through another round of evidence, my phone buzzed with an unlisted number. A text appeared, simple and devastating. The one behind it all is your husband. I read it twice, then a third time. My chest tightened, but not from surprise, more from confirmation. I thought of Caleb's distance, his evasions, the contract signed against me. Betrayal layered over betrayal, each sheet of paper another blade between my ribs. The message ended with no signature, no hint of the sender, just the truth I already feared. The empty-handed bride, I realized, had been holding the sharpest weapon all along, knowledge, and now I had to decide how to use it, against a family or against the man I once loved. Defeat has a sound. In the Whitaker manor, it was hushed voices behind locked doors, the rustle of shredded paper in fireplaces, the click of phones hung up mid-conversation. They thought I had walked away, but from my rented apartment in the city, I was pulling threads that would soon unravel everything they had built. Through my auditing firm, I traced every loan, every mortgage, every liability the family had hidden. Their empire looked gilded from the outside, but it was mortgaged to its bones. Creditors circled. The estate's loans were bundled, traded, nearly toxic, and that gave me my chance. I moved quietly. Through shell entities linked to my trust, I began buying their debt, one sliver at a time. At first, it was small notes, overdue contracts, accounts receivable sold for pennies. Then I targeted the largest, the Whitaker Foundation's revolving credit line, their lifeline with the bank. When the final signature cleared, the debt that had once shackled them now belonged to me. The banker who met me in his office looked almost amused. "Do you know what this means, Mrs. Hart?" he asked. I did. It meant that with their collateral pledged, I was now the controlling creditor. The Whitakers might own the house, but I owned the noose. The twist came with unexpected mercy. Instead of foreclosing, the bank agreed to a restructuring plan under my control. I would assume management oversight, protecting their reputation from total collapse. But the deed of trust would be amended. I, Avery Hart, had final say. When Evan, the journalist, published his investigation, the tide turned. His headline was sharp as glass, "Empty-handed bride or financial assassin." The story exposed the foundation's fraud but cleared me of blame. Documents, emails, and recordings painted me not as an accomplice, but as the scapegoat who refused to break. The public, hungry for heroes, found in me the woman they had misjudged. I waited until the family summoned a crisis meeting. They gathered in the manor's library, voices tense, fear rippling beneath their bravado. Lorraine sat rigid in her pearl necklace, Caleb at her side, eyes hard and distant. They didn't notice the banker who walked in with me until it was too late. "Mrs. Hart is here as the new controlling party," he announced. Silence slammed into the room. Lorraine's face blanched, then twisted into fury. "This is absurd. She's nothing. She's no one." I laid the documents on the table. Empty-handed, remember. Yet my signature is on every note you owe. Caleb's hand clenched into a fist, but he said nothing. I saw in his eyes not surprise, but recognition. He had underestimated me, and now the consequences were printed in black and white. The banker left, and the room erupted. They shouted at me, accused me of betrayal, of humiliation. I didn't raise my voice. I simply let the papers speak. Interest rates recalculated, signatures of transfer, new terms of governance. The estate was no longer their playground. It was my responsibility. The fallout came quickly. Reporters swarmed the gates as leaked files exposed every questionable contract. Lorraine's smiling photos at charity galas ran side by side with evidence of shell accounts. Caleb's deals surfaced too, side businesses built on diverted funds. They tried to deny it, but the documents were undeniable. I stood before cameras only once. "I didn't come here to destroy a family," I told the press. "I came here to stop the destruction they invited on themselves." The words were calm, but inside me a storm raged. Winning felt hollow when it came at the cost of a marriage, a home, even the illusion of love. In the manor, silence replaced laughter. Staff walked with downcast eyes. Caleb refused to meet mine, sleeping in separate rooms when I stayed. Lorraine spent her days pacing like a ghost, rehearsing defenses that no one would listen to. The estate had been saved, but the family was beyond saving. The final fracture came in front of the cameras. Caleb stood beside Lorraine, his jaw tight, his gaze a blade. Reporters thrust microphones at him, demanding a response. His words cut deeper than any contract. "She betrayed this family," he said coldly. "She was never one of us." The statement echoed across networks, headlines blazing. Betrayal turned inside out, twisted into my name. My triumph had come full circle, dressed as defeat. Power has a weight, and once I carried it, the world refused to let me set it down. Newspapers plastered my face on front pages. Some heralded me as the woman who tamed an empire, others painted me as a conniving usurper. Morning shows debated whether I was a role model or a cautionary tale. Social media split in two, half cheering me on with hashtags, half cursing me as the villain who destroyed a family. I had become both saint and sinner, and there was no way back to anonymity. The Whitaker estate was quieter than ever, its grandeur now hollow. Caleb and I lived like strangers passing in a train station, glances that never lingered, words clipped and functional. Our marriage was over, though neither of us said it aloud. The silence between us was thicker than any argument. I used to think betrayal broke hearts. I learned it actually froze them. At night, I would sit in the library surrounded by ledgers and legal documents and wonder if Lorraine's fate had become my own. Had I turned into a cold strategist, sacrificing warmth for dominance? Was I repeating the same cycle I despised? The house whispered answers I didn't want to hear. Then came the blow I didn't anticipate. A press conference interrupted evening broadcasts. A man stepped forward, a supposed former auditor of my trust. He held a folder thick with documents, claiming I had orchestrated manipulations of distressed debt years ago, the same tactics I had accused the Whitakers of using. He alleged I profited by exploiting loopholes, disguising myself as savior while lining my pockets. The news exploded. Anchors questioned whether my rise was built on deception. Hashtags flipped, painting me as no better than the family I had exposed. My chest tightened as I watched the headlines scroll. Avery Hart, hero or hypocrite. But the timing was too precise, the details too neat. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had built this witness, coached him, handed him just enough to look convincing. I dug deeper and found the trail, a global law firm that had quietly represented the Whitakers for decades. They weren't protecting Lorraine or Caleb out of loyalty. They were protecting their own long-standing financial arrangements with the family's offshore accounts. By discrediting me, they hoped to close the case before scrutiny reached them. I thought Caleb had been the mastermind of my downfall, but he was only a pawn. The real puppeteer had been manipulating all of us. Caleb signed what they placed before him, smiled when they told him to, condemned me when they needed a soundbite. His betrayal still cut, but now it looked pitiful, like watching a marionette curse while strings guided his every move. For a time, I held on to one fragile thread of loyalty, his younger sister, Claire. She was the only one who seemed untouched by the poison, the only one who had whispered, "I believe you," when the scandals first broke. I let myself trust her, confided more than I should have, until the night I saw the footage. Claire slipping into the firm's downtown office, a USB clutched in her hand. My USB, she had delivered the files I had built so carefully, the evidence that could defend me, straight into the hands of my enemies. When I confronted her, her eyes filled with tears, but her words gutted me. They promised to protect us if I gave it to them. I had no choice. No choice. That was the Whitaker creed. Sacrifice someone else. Preserve yourself. I realized then that trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. The law firm moved fast. Within days, subpoenas circled me. Investigators hinted at indictments. Prosecutors whispered about charges. The control I had built, brick by brick, slid from my hands. For the first time, I wasn't merely outnumbered. I was outmaneuvered. One morning, as cameras gathered outside my apartment, I stood at the window and saw my reflection. The woman staring back wasn't the bride who once walked into a glittering hall with hope in her chest. She wasn't even the strategist who bought debt like weapons. She was cornered prey, forced to decide whether to run, fight, or burn the whole board down. The phone rang. My attorney's voice was grim. "Avery, they're moving to end it. If we don't act now, you won't just lose control. You'll lose everything." The walls around me seemed to close in. Power had lifted me high, but now it threatened to crush me under its cost. There comes a point when silence becomes complicity, and I was done being complicit. They had tried to smear me, erase me, even indict me. But the one thing they underestimated was my willingness to burn the illusion down in front of the world. I gathered every file I had collected, the camera feeds, the forged emails, the transfers disguised as charity. For months I had hidden them like stolen jewels. Now I handed them to the court and, at the same time, to the public. The night before the hearing, I uploaded the archive to a secure site, released it with a single message. Here is the truth. Judge me by it. The files spread like wildfire. Screens across the country flickered with clips of Lorraine rehearsing speeches before pocketing money, Caleb signing fraudulent contracts, Claire delivering the USB to lawyers who had orchestrated the charade. When I stepped into the courthouse, the crowd outside wasn't hostile. They cheered. Some held signs calling me brave. Others simply shouted my name. For the first time since the nightmare began, I wasn't alone. The reality had shifted. Public outrage pressed on the government until prosecutors had no choice but to act. Inside the courtroom, the Whitakers sat like fallen royalty. Lorraine's pearls looked like shackles. Caleb's jaw was stone. They refused to look at me. I didn't care. I had sacrificed everything that once tied me to them. My marriage, my place at their table, even the fragile hope of reconciliation. What remained was truth. The trial was merciless. Evidence projected on screens, testimony unraveling their schemes. The video from the hidden cameras silenced the room each time it played. The Whitakers' attorneys fought like drowning men, but the current was against them. And when the verdict came, it thundered. Guilty. The Whitaker family was convicted of fraud and money laundering. Their empire collapsed in a single gavel strike. The world gasped. I didn't. I had seen it coming since the first crack in that mirror. Afterward, people asked me if victory felt sweet. It didn't. It felt heavy, like carrying a body out of a burning house. I had won, but at the cost of love, kinship, even illusions of belonging. Still, the ashes gave me room to rebuild. I refused to vanish into the role of avenger. Instead, I turned my survival into something larger. I founded an organization, a true foundation, transparent, accountable, to support women trapped in marriages where money was weaponized against them. Grants, legal aid, financial literacy programs, the tools I wished I had when Lorraine first sneered at me across the breakfast table. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been their scapegoat. Now I was the shield for others. Months later, I returned once to the estate, not as family, but as owner. The great hall had been stripped bare, the portraits removed. Only the broken mirror had been replaced. In its place hung a new frame, my photograph, candid, taken outside the courthouse the day of the verdict. I was smiling, not triumphant, but free. For the first time, the reflection in that house was honest. Standing there, I understood that transcendence isn't about erasing pain. It's about carrying it into a different form. The betrayal had not destroyed me. It had remade me. When the press gathered for the launch of my foundation, cameras once again crowded, microphones pressed forward. This time, I didn't flinch. I looked straight at them, my voice steady. I was once called the empty-handed bride. But the truth is, no one enters a marriage empty-handed. We all bring hope, trust, and love. When those are betrayed, what we carry becomes survival. I chose to turn survival into something more. But I leave you with this question. If it were you, if power and mercy lay in your hands, would you choose power or would you choose compassion? The question hung in the air, unanswered, echoing beyond the flash of cameras. It wasn't for the Whitakers anymore. It was for everyone watching, for everyone who had ever been silenced, underestimated, erased. And for the first time, I felt the world lean in, listening.